It was one of those Saturdays where everything felt just right. The sun was out, the sky was a perfect blue, and the smell of sunscreen and fresh-cut grass mixed in the air. I was in the kitchen blending up some lemonade when I heard the sliding glass door open and the sound of wet feet padding across the floor. That wasn't unusual. It was summer, and my 3 kids practically lived in the pool this time of year, but the silence that followed was. "Mom," my daughter's voice cracked a little, like she was trying hard not to cry. "He made us get out." I turned around, confused. All 3 of my kids stood there, wrapped in their towels, water dripping from their hair onto the tile. My youngest, Marcus, clutched his goggles in one hand and his favorite pool noodle in the other, his lips pressed tight like he was holding back tears. Jasmine, the middle one, wouldn't look me in the eye. "What do you mean?" I asked, already walking toward them. "Who made you get out?" "Karen's son," Jasmine muttered. "He came with his friends and said we had to leave the pool because he was using it today." I blinked. "Wait, he's in our backyard pool? Right now?" My oldest, Ethan, nodded. "Yeah. He just walked in with like 4 of his friends and said they were using it for the day. He said his mom worked it out with you." The blender was still running in the background, but I didn't even notice it anymore. I dropped the towel I was holding and headed straight for the sliding door, fury boiling just under the surface. The nerve, the absolute nerve. Let me back up for a second. We moved into this neighborhood about 2 years ago. Quiet cul-de-sac, good schools, lots of friendly faces. We'd saved up for that house for a long time, and when we found the one with a decent-sized backyard and an in-ground pool, it felt like hitting the jackpot. The kids loved it. That pool became their safe haven. Birthdays, cookouts, summer evenings, everything happened around that pool. We weren't the wealthiest on the block, but we were proud of what we had. Our next-door neighbors, the Petersons, were something else. Karen, yes, her actual name was Karen, was the kind of person who baked cookies for the HOA president but would report you for leaving your trash bin out past pickup. She was always polite, but in that passive-aggressive, bless-your-heart way that made your skin crawl. Her son, Ryan, was 17 going on insufferable. Loud, cocky, and constantly strutting around like he owned the neighborhood. I didn't pay him much attention at first. Teenagers are teenagers, but he always gave me this look, like he was doing me a favor just by acknowledging my presence. My kids stayed out of his way, and I figured as long as no one crossed any lines, we'd all coexist just fine. Apparently, that assumption was dead wrong. When I stormed outside that afternoon, the sound of splashing and laughter hit me immediately. There they were, 5 boys, all older teens, lounging in my pool like it was some kind of public resort. Loud music blared from one of those Bluetooth speakers, and a pile of shoes and backpacks sat neatly by the pool steps like they'd done this a dozen times before. "Excuse me," I said, loud and sharp. The laughter stopped. Ryan turned around, not looking the least bit concerned. In fact, he looked almost amused. "Oh hey, Mrs. He trailed off, waving dismissively like my name wasn't worth remembering. "It's cool, my mom talked to you, right? We're just using the pool for a bit." I blinked at him. "No, she didn't. This is our pool, and no one asked permission. You need to leave." He gave me this look, this smug, squint-a-little smile that made my blood boil. "Well, my mom said it was fine. She said she emailed you. Said you never replied, so we figured no answer meant yes." I could feel my hands clenching involuntarily. That's not how that works. You don't just show up at someone's house because they didn't say no. Get out. Now. One of his friends muttered something under his breath and laughed. Ryan raised his voice slightly. "It's not a big deal. We'll only be here for like an hour. Your kids weren't even swimming when we got here." "They were in the pool, Ryan," I snapped. "You made them leave." "Yeah, well," he said, shrugging, "they looked like they were done." It took everything in me not to yell. "You don't decide that. This isn't a park. You and your friends need to pack up your things and leave now." He rolled his eyes. "Wow, okay. Chill. You don't have to be rude about it." I nearly laughed at the audacity. You walked into someone's backyard, kicked their kids out of their own pool, and you think I'm the one being rude? He leaned back against the pool's edge, dripping water, still not making any move to get out. "Look, We're not doing anything wrong. We're not breaking anything. It's just water." "Ryan," I said, stepping closer, "this isn't negotiable. You're trespassing." He sighed dramatically and hoisted himself out of the water. "Fine. Whatever. You didn't have to freak out." As the others followed, grumbling and grabbing their stuff, I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. The entitlement was staggering. I'd seen it in bits and pieces over the past 2 years. Karen claiming the HOA shouldn't allow certain types of Halloween decorations, Ryan telling the mailman to stop parking too close to their driveway, but this was on another level. They left the gate swinging open behind them, wet footprints trailing out into the driveway. Ryan turned back as he walked, flashing that smug smile again. "You could have just said no, you know. No need to get all dramatic." I didn't respond. I just closed the gate behind them and locked it. When I came back inside, the kids were sitting at the kitchen island, quiet. Jasmine picked at the edge of her towel. Marcus looked up at me and asked softly, "Are we still allowed to swim today?" My heart broke a little. "Of course you are," I said, putting on my best fake mom smile. "They're gone now." Ethan didn't say anything. He just nodded and got up to grab a new towel from the cabinet. As they filed back outside, I stood by the door for a moment, watching them. They didn't run or laugh like they usually did. They just climbed into the pool slowly, cautiously, like they weren't sure if they belonged anymore. That's what did it for me. It wasn't Ryan's arrogance or Karen's dismissive attitude. It was the way my kids looked afraid to enjoy something that was theirs. A place that had always been safe suddenly wasn't. And all because someone else decided they had more right to it than we did. I poured the lemonade down the sink. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. It had been a few days since the pool incident, and I had hoped that it was a one-time thing, a heat-wave-driven lapse in judgment from a teenage boy with too much time and too little respect. I told myself he'd been embarrassed by being called out, that the sting of getting kicked out would keep him from trying anything like that again. I was wrong. It was Thursday afternoon, just after 2. I'd taken the day off work because my youngest had a dentist appointment that morning, and we'd made a lazy day out of it. After lunch, the kids went out back to swim. I was folding laundry in the living room, enjoying the background noise of splashing and laughter, something that had finally started to sound normal again, when I heard the gate click. I knew that sound. The metal latch had a distinctive clink when it shut. I froze for a second, listening. Then came voices, male, older, not my kids. My stomach sank. I walked quickly to the sliding door and looked out. There he was again. Ryan. Same cocky posture, same ridiculous tank top that looked like it had never seen a washing machine. And with him were 2 boys I didn't recognize and 1 girl. They were already kicking off their shoes like they belonged there. My kids stood to the side, confused and stiff. Marcus clung to the ladder at the shallow end, eyes wide. Jasmine had gotten out of the pool entirely. Ethan stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight, but not moving. I stepped outside. Ryan turned around when he saw me, that same smug expression on his face like I was the one trespassing. "I thought we already talked about this," I said, voice low and firm. He shrugged. "Yeah. We just figured today might be different." "It's not. Leave." "Look," he said, starting to walk toward me, hands held out in mock surrender, "we're not trying to start drama. My mom said she emailed you again. She said you'd understand." "She didn't," I snapped. "And I don't." "She said you never replied, and that meant we could come over if you weren't using it." "You don't live here. This isn't a shared space. This is private property." The girl with them giggled and whispered something to one of the boys. Ryan glanced back at her, clearly trying to save face. "Okay, wow," he said, louder now. "You don't have to be so aggressive. We just thought we'd use the pool for a bit. It's like 90 degrees out. My kids were already using it." He looked over at them, then back at me. "Yeah, but they weren't even swimming when we came in. They were just sitting there. Because you walked in uninvited." Again. He raised his eyebrows. "Look, I get it. You're trying to be, like, territorial or whatever. But this is dumb. It's just a pool. Chill." That word, chill, landed like a slap. I stepped closer, jaw clenched. "You're not welcome here. I don't care what your mom told you or what you assumed. You don't come into someone's backyard without permission. Ever. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." His smirk faded for a second. Just a flicker, but it was there. Then he scoffed, turned, and muttered something under his breath as he motioned to his friends. One of them said, "Whatever, man. Let's just go." The girl rolled her eyes. "This neighborhood's full of psychos." They filed out, but not before Ryan turned around and added, "You know, if you weren't so uptight, people might actually like you here." I didn't respond. I waited until the gate clicked behind them, then walked over and locked it myself. The kids got out of the pool on their own. They didn't say anything, but I could tell the energy had shifted. Jasmine wrapped herself in her towel and sat down in one of the chairs without speaking. Marcus sat next to her, fidgeting with the corner of his towel. Ethan leaned against the fence, staring down the path Ryan had taken. "I'm sorry, guys," I said, sitting next to them. Ethan finally spoke. "He's not gonna stop." I didn't say anything right away, because he was right. That evening, after the kids went to bed, I decided to finally talk to Karen directly. I wasn't interested in exchanging passive-aggressive notes or dealing with her through her kid. I wanted to hear what kind of explanation she could possibly give. I walked over to her house just after 8. The sun was still hanging on the horizon, painting everything gold and pink. Her car was in the driveway, and I could hear the faint hum of her TV through the window. I knocked. She opened the door in a flowy cardigan and a glass of white wine in hand. "Oh, hi," she said, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hi, Karen. Do you have a second?" She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "Of course. Everything okay?" I kept my tone neutral. "I wanted to talk about Ryan. He's come into our yard again. Twice now, actually. With his friends." She sipped her wine. "Oh, I thought I sent you an email." "You might have, but I didn't see it. And regardless, I never gave permission. You can't assume silence means yes." She tilted her head, looking mildly amused. "I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. They're just kids. It's a pool. You've got a fence, they didn't damage anything, right?" "That's not the point. It's not about damage. It's about boundaries. And safety. My kids were intimidated out of their own pool." She gave a small, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, come on. Ryan's not intimidating. He's a good boy. You might be reading into this a little too much." "I'm not," I said, sharper than I intended. He walked in, uninvited, told my kids to leave, and then brought a group of teenagers in to use the pool. "That's not harmless." She sighed. "Okay, I'm sorry if it came across that way. But honestly, I think you're being a little too rigid here. In this neighborhood, we're all supposed to support each other. If someone needs something for a couple hours, that's not support. That's entitlement." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the smile fading. "Well, I guess I misjudged how generous you'd be." I stared at her for a long second. "I'm asking you to talk to your son. Make sure this doesn't happen again. Because next time, I'm not knocking on your door. I'm calling the police." She blinked, surprised by the shift in tone. "Wow. Okay. That feels extreme." "It's not. It's the only line I have left." She didn't respond. Just took another sip of her wine and looked out toward the sidewalk. "I'll talk to him," she finally said, then opened the door and stepped inside without another word. I walked home feeling more exhausted than satisfied. There was something about her reaction, the way she brushed it off like I was the one overreacting, that didn't sit right. It wasn't just that she didn't care. It was that she didn't see it. To her, my property, my rules, my kids' comfort, it was all optional. And Ryan, he was just taking after her. I didn't want to escalate things. I didn't want this to turn into some drawn-out neighborhood drama. But I also wasn't going to keep quiet while my kids felt like guests in their own home. 2 days passed quietly. Then Saturday came. I was out in the front yard watering the plants when I saw Ryan walking down the street with a speaker under one arm and a beach towel draped over his shoulder. He wasn't looking at me, but he wasn't avoiding eye contact either. Just strolling down like he owned the block. Behind him were 3 more teens, laughing, carrying sodas and bags of chips. I didn't move. I just stood there, hose in hand, watching as they turned down the side path that led toward our yard. I shut off the water and followed. When I turned the corner, the gate was already open. Ryan was halfway into the yard when he saw me standing at the edge of the house. He stopped mid-step, blinked, and then shrugged. "Didn't realize you were home," he said casually. I didn't reply. Just held up my phone, already dialing. He held up both hands. All right. We're going." One of the other boys looked confused. "Dude, I thought you said this was fine." "She's being a buzzkill," Ryan muttered, walking past me. I didn't say anything. I just watched as they left. And then I locked the gate. I latched it. And I stayed outside for the rest of the afternoon like a sentry. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking of Marcus clinging to the pool ladder, his eyes wide and confused. The way Ethan looked at me after the first incident. How Jasmine had stayed quiet the whole time, like silence might make her invisible. This wasn't about water. It wasn't even about the pool anymore. It was about respect. And somehow, we'd become the exception to it. And if no one else was going to set the boundary, then I would. The following Monday started off like any other. Coffee, rushed breakfast, and the usual back-and-forth chaos of getting the kids where they needed to be. But even as I tried to settle into the week, there was this tension hanging in the air. I couldn't shake it. The house didn't feel the same. The yard didn't feel the same. The pool, once the center of our family's summer joy, now felt like a place I had to guard. I kept looking out the back window, checking the gate, listening for any voices that didn't belong. It felt ridiculous, being this on edge over something so mundane. But it wasn't just a pool, it was ours. It was supposed to be safe. That's what kept bothering me. Not just Ryan's behavior, but how little weight it seemed to carry with anyone else. Like I was supposed to just accept it and move on. I thought about calling the police that day, but part of me hesitated. I wasn't trying to escalate things unnecessarily. I knew how it would look, a grown woman calling the cops on a group of teenagers for being in her yard. People love to act like they understand boundaries until you actually try to enforce one. Besides, I still held on to the slim hope that maybe, after Saturday's showdown, Ryan had finally gotten the message. That hope lasted until Wednesday. I'd just gotten home from work, changed into a t-shirt and shorts, and walked out to water the plants. I made my usual sweep, checked the fence, glanced at the gate latch, and immediately noticed something was off. The gate wasn't just unlocked. It was propped open. I walked toward it, heart already pounding. The sounds reached me before I saw them. Laughter. Splashing. A loud thud that sounded like someone jumping off the side into the deep end. I turned the corner and there they were again. Ryan, his friends, and now a couple of girls, all sprawled out on my poolside furniture. Bags of chips were open on the patio table. Someone had dragged a cooler in from the driveway. A Bluetooth speaker was blasting music. It looked like a backyard party. My backyard. My furniture. My rules. Completely ignored. They didn't even flinch when they saw me. Ryan just raised a hand lazily, like I was some sort of party guest arriving late. "You're kidding me," I muttered. I didn't yell this time. I didn't storm in. I walked up calmly and stood at the edge of the pool, just close enough that I had their full attention. "Out. All of you." There was a pause. One of the girls stopped mid-cannonball and lowered herself into the pool. Ryan sat up, sunglasses pushed onto his forehead. "We're not bothering anyone. You're trespassing." He shrugged. "The gate was open. Because you opened it." He gave me a lopsided grin. "It's not like we broke in." I stared at him. "Ryan, this is the 3rd time." He scoffed. "You didn't say it was a permanent ban." I walked over to the speaker and shut it off. The silence that followed was sudden and awkward. "I'm not going to say it again." "Get out." There was grumbling. Eye rolls. A few sarcastic comments under their breath as they gathered their things. One of the boys knocked over a chair as he left, muttering something I couldn't quite make out. Another girl deliberately let her drink spill onto the patio stones. Ryan was the last one to leave. He didn't say anything this time. Just gave me that same smirk and walked out the gate. I stood there for a long moment after they were gone, trying to figure out how something so straightforward had turned into a full-blown standoff. I didn't want to overreact, but this wasn't harmless anymore. It wasn't just a boundary violation, it was consistent, deliberate, and completely dismissive. That night, I filed a report. Not an emergency, not a call for sirens, just a formal report with the local precinct. I explained the repeated trespassing, the intimidation, and the fact that the pool had become a point of conflict in what used to be a peaceful home. The officer on the phone was polite, but his tone made it clear there wasn't much they could do unless it happened again while I had proof. Technically, unless there's damage or they refuse to leave when asked, it's a civil matter, he said. If you can get footage or document the behavior, it'll help. So I did. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and bought a motion sensor camera. It wasn't expensive or fancy, but it did the job. I installed it near the back porch, angled toward the pool and the gate. I also started keeping the gate padlocked when we weren't outside. I wasn't playing anymore. That weekend, I noticed something new. The kids were spending less and less time outside. Even on a hot Saturday afternoon, they stayed indoors, curled up with books or video games. Marcus, usually the first one in the pool, didn't even ask. When I suggested going outside, they all hesitated. Jasmine finally said it. What if he comes back? I wanted to lie. I wanted to say he wouldn't. But I didn't. I just told her that if he did, I'd handle it. That they didn't need to be afraid of using what was theirs. It hurt to see them like that. To know that someone else's entitlement had taken something from them. By Monday, I'd had enough. I emailed the HOA, not the general inbox, but directly to the president, Mrs. Connors, who lived 2 streets down and treated HOA meetings like UN summits. I kept it clear and professional. I detailed the incidents, explained the steps I'd taken, and included stills from the security footage. The response I got 2 days later was infuriatingly neutral. Dear name, we understand your concern and thank you for reaching out. While the HOA does not govern personal property disputes, we always encourage neighbors to resolve matters through communication and mutual respect. Bess. C. Connors. It was classic HOA, completely toothless and carefully worded to avoid taking any real stance. I wasn't surprised, but I was still disappointed. What really pushed me over the edge wasn't the HOA or even Ryan's smugness. It was Marcus. One night, while I was tucking him in, he looked up at me and asked, "Are we going to move?" The question came out so casual, like he was asking what was for breakfast. Why would you ask that, baby? Because the pool's not fun anymore. And the other house didn't have a pool, but it was quieter. I sat there, stunned. We'd worked so hard to build this life, to find a home where the kids could feel safe and happy. And now, that little corner of joy had been stripped away. No, I said finally. We're not moving. Even if Ryan keeps coming? Yes, I said, firmer now. Even then. This is our home. The next day, I added another lock to the gate and changed the code on the garage. I printed a private property, no trespassing sign and posted it where it couldn't be missed. I even printed a copy of the police report and left it in a folder near the door, just in case. For a while, it worked. Days passed. The camera didn't catch anything unusual. The kids slowly started dipping their toes back into summer. Marcus even cannonballed again. The laughter started to return. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Ryan wasn't the type to back off because of a few locks. He wasn't used to hearing no, and his mother certainly wasn't going to teach him how to take one with grace. So I waited, and I planned. Because if they tried again, I wasn't going to just kick them out. I was going to make sure it never happened again. Saturday started like any other summer weekend. The heat had already settled in by mid-morning, thick and unmoving. I was out front watering the azaleas when I noticed Karen's car wasn't in the driveway. I didn't think much of it, until I saw Ryan and 2 of his friends strolling down the sidewalk with pool towels over their shoulders and one of them carrying a bag of chips like they were headed to a barbecue. I didn't need to guess where they were going. They turned into the side path like they'd done it 100 times. They didn't knock. They didn't pause. They didn't even check if anyone was home. Just casually made their way toward the backyard, toward my pool. What they didn't know, of course, was that I was expecting them. I walked around the side of the house, nice and slow. They'd already gotten the gate open. Ryan knew exactly how to unlatch it. He always had that easy confidence, like he didn't believe anyone could actually hold him accountable. I waited until they were all in the yard before stepping through the side gate behind them. The moment he saw me, Ryan froze. One of his friends had already started peeling off his shirt. Another was opening the cooler. Again, I said flatly, not even raising my voice. You really thought this was a good idea? Ryan tried to recover, shrugging like I'd caught him coming in 2 minutes early to a dinner party instead of breaking and entering. It's just hot out. You weren't using it. I don't care. We've had this conversation. You're done using this pool. He gave a short, bitter laugh. It's not that deep. It is when you're standing in someone else's yard without permission. You've been warned. Multiple times. I told your mother. I locked the gate. I've spoken to the police. So now it's not just disrespect, it's criminal trespass. One of the boys muttered something to Ryan. They started to move toward the exit, but it was too late. I'd already dialed. The dispatcher on the other end of the line asked me to confirm the address and nature of the situation. I answered clearly, keeping my voice calm and measured. My hands didn't even shake. I told them there were trespassers in my yard, that I had video footage, that this was the 4th time it had happened. When I looked back up, Ryan's mask of arrogance was starting to crack. You actually called the cops? He asked, incredulous. I told you I would. You're insane, he said, stepping forward. It's a pool. My mom said. Your mom isn't here, and she doesn't decide what happens on my property. I'm not hurting anything. No, but you're violating my rights. And those rights matter. They all stood there for another few seconds like they weren't sure whether to bolt or stay. Eventually, Ryan dropped the towel over his shoulder and mumbled, "Let's go." The others followed him out, mumbling as they left. I didn't say anything else. I just watched them go and locked the gate behind them, again. The officer arrived about 20 minutes later. I explained everything, how many times it had happened, that I'd already filed a report, and that this time I had footage. He watched the playback from the security camera without saying much, then nodded and wrote everything down. They've been warned. If it happens again, we can pursue charges, he said. You've done the right thing documenting everything. It didn't feel like a victory at first. Just a process. But still, something shifted that day. Ryan didn't show up again. Not that weekend. Not the next. The pool stayed quiet, just mine and the kids. Karen, however, didn't stay quiet. On Monday morning, she was waiting by my driveway when I came out to check the mailbox. Sunglasses on. Arms crossed. That tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I heard you called the police, she said like it was gossip. I did. You could have just talked to me. I did. You didn't listen. Neither did your son. Her smile dropped. You know, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Ryan's a teenager. He doesn't always think things through. But calling the police? That's extreme. What's extreme, I said slowly, is the number of times I had to tell him, and you, that this behavior wasn't okay. And nothing changed. I just think it's sad. I thought we were trying to build community here. I'm trying to build a safe home for my kids. That's the only community I care about right now. She didn't say anything after that. Just turned around and walked back toward her porch. The days after that were quiet. The kind of quiet I hadn't realized I'd missed. The kids went back to their usual rhythm, splashing in the pool after school, tossing balls back and forth, arguing over who had to clean up the floaties. It was normal again. Peaceful. And more than that, it was ours. A week later, I got a letter in the mail from the HOA. At first, I braced myself for some petty complaint, Karen's final jab through official channels, but instead, It was a notice that the HOA was initiating a review of Karen's behavior as a board member. Apparently, 2 other neighbors had filed similar complaints, one about her trying to borrow a grill, and another about her son using their driveway as a basketball court for hours. The letter was polite and bureaucratic, but it came with something rare in our neighborhood: accountability. 2 weeks later, Karen quietly stepped down from the HOA board. No announcement. No goodbye note. Just gone. A new face took her place at the next meeting. By the end of the month, there was a moving truck in her driveway. I didn't watch them pack. I didn't gloat. I kept to myself and went about my day. But that afternoon, as I sat in the backyard with my feet in the pool, Marcus swam by and grinned up at me. Jasmine and Ethan were tossing a beach ball between them, laughing. Everything felt right again. Ethan floated by and said, "So, we won, right?" I smiled. "No. We just kept what was already ours." He nodded like he understood something bigger than I expected. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, the cicadas humming in the background. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about padlocks or gate latches or uninvited guests. Just the quiet satisfaction of standing your ground, even when no one else seems to care. Some fights aren't loud. They don't come with shouting or spectacle. Sometimes, they're just a slow, steady refusal to be pushed around. And sometimes, that's enough to win.